Good evening. This is David Greenwald. You are watching Vanguard Court Watch Live, and we are in segment 3 of the Ajay Dev case. The first two, we've been talking to various interns about their experience reading the trial transcript. Today we have Danny Silva and Bryce Gaston, who are going to complete our series. And so let's start with Bryce. Which witnesses did you read testimony from, and tell us a little bit about them?
So the first that I did was Ajay's daughter. So the complaining witness, and her testimony, I read a piece of it, and I thought it was a little bit conflicting at times. It was mainly about her experience with when the Devs went on their Caribbean vacation, and her complaints about abuse and that kind of realm.
So in what way did you think it was conflicting?
There were a few times that just didn't match up. Originally, she claimed that she didn't remember house sitting for the Devs while they were in the Caribbean on vacation, and then later the way that she answered some questions were kind of hinting at the fact that she was there during their vacation, and so it was kind of confusing in those points. And then another thing I found interesting was she claimed that Ajay and his wife were physically abusive to her. And then later she claimed that she didn't mean to say that, and that wasn't what she meant. Abusive wasn't what she meant. So I thought that was interesting.
So did she describe the physical abuse, or did she just say that they were physically abusive?
Yeah, she said that they stopped her and hit her several times, and then later said that she didn't mean it to describe it as abuse. So I thought that was interesting in light of her later claims.
Okay. And what other witness have you read?
So I also read about Ajay's wife, Peggy, and I thought that her testimony was a little bit less contradictory, and a lot of things came to light that weren't previously mentioned. One thing I thought was interesting is that when her and Ajay were in the Caribbean on vacation, they decided to take their daughter off their will, and found out that she knew about it. So she was definitely, they claimed that she was definitely upset about that. So that was interesting too.
So she found out about that, and how did she react?
They said that she was pretty upset about it, and she talked to one of their other family members about it, but I didn't read the details since it was Peggy's witness testimony that I was reading, but I know that she did express her feelings of just kind of being upset about that.
And was that the extent of Peggy's testimony that you read?
Pretty much. I think that was the main thing that I found interesting in her piece that I read.
Okay. So Danny, what witnesses did you read testimony from?
I mostly read testimony from Mark Herman, who was one of the lead investigators from the Davis police that was going over the investigation. He talked a lot about the pretext call, which is a very crucial part of the trial. And he also talked kind of like the timeline-wise of when the complaining witness came back from Nepal and how she was involved and interviewed in multiple occasions for the case. I found it really interesting just how he details everything. I do find that the information that he kind of lists out, it gives like a kind of timeline after he receives the case, because there was another investigator who had the case before him. and he was kind of handed it off and worked with what he could, interviewed the complaining witness as much as he could, and he was very much involved with what I said, the pretext call. And so just kind of re-outlining what the pretext call was on sometime in February 2004, he had written a script out and had the complaining witness call Ajay. And during a pretext call, what a person usually does is they kind of follow a script that an officer, some individual, writes for them, and then they try to get evidence or confession out of the potential suspect. And in this case, the complaining witness was trying to have Ajay confess that he had sexual relations with the complaining witness. And this pretext call is very crucial because it is one of the key pieces of evidence that the jury actually focuses on in deciding their verdict. And like in this pretext call, some of the information had been some of the conversation had been in Farsi and Nepalese. I apologize. In Nepalese, and what had ended up happening was the complaining witness was the one who translated it, and that translation was provided to the jury, and then the jury accepted that translation. This is also kind of quoted in the 102-page petition of writ of habeas corpus that was released very recently.
So what did Mark Herman have to say about the pretext call?
About the pretext call, he basically talked about the pretext call. He basically outlined what happened. He kind of said what the topics were. He didn't really go into detail in the portions I read. I read like all of his testimonies. He had multiple testimonies over multiple days, and he never really specifically went into the quote that was read by the jury, which I found really interesting.
Did he testify that it was his belief that Ajay had confessed to the crime during the pretext call?
I didn't get that, but I do believe that he got that that Ajay was somewhat aggressive, that there was... That's kind of what I got from the testimony, that there was a potential, that they had been very angry towards each other, and that there was... He kind of he didn't really go into the translation, but he did very much kind of defend the pretext call, from my opinion.
In what way did he defend it?
How did he defend the pretext call? He talks about... I mostly focused on the areas where, like, I was like, oh, what's going on? But from what I saw, it didn't really seem like he was pointing out to where it, like, supported some areas. A lot of the cross-examination focused on the fact that he didn't follow up on a lot of topics. For example, the complaining witness had a boyfriend at the time, or an ex-boyfriend that they started arguing with, and he didn't follow up on that. Also, like, just in context of the pretext call, because this really caught my eye, is the fact that the pretext call was done on the same day that Ajay's wife was going through surgery in the hospital. And so, yeah, like, he's going to be aggressive if you're going to call him about an ex-boyfriend and potentially, like, them having broken up, which the witness sadly didn't know about, but the prosecution had... Or not the prosecution, the attorney had brought up during examination.
I see. The portion of the victim's, or the alleged victim's, testimony, did she talk about the pretext call in the portion that you read?
No, I don't believe so. No, I don't think that I read that part in another part.
I do kind of want to hear a little bit more about the claims of physical abuse, and this is like separate from sexual abuse, correct?
Right.
So in what I read from Mark Herman, he had mentioned that there were questions of him whether or not he gathered evidence concerning physical abuse. There was like an email from what I understand, that he didn't get, or there were like other claims that had been brought up before. During the pretext call, it had been mentioned that there was like a slight hinting at the fact that the defendant had been accused of physically hurting her before, and then having this have escalated to this point. And so there was kind of that assumption in the pretext call context from the defendant himself. Ajay had said that.
Yeah, I think that she didn't really go into it fully. I think there might be another spot in the whole case that I specifically haven't read yet, but she just described slapping and hitting from both Peggy and Ajay. And so I don't know if there were any evidence collected about that, since I've only read the complaining witnesses' side. So I'm not quite sure what hard evidence they gathered or didn't gather about that.
And then in terms of the stuff with the will, was there any other evidence pointing to the fact that there was kind of not a pleasant relationship between the parents and the complaining witness?
Yeah, there was definitely, both of the witnesses that I read about both described some difficulties in their relationships and times when they have been upset about each other. And I heard from Peggy's side why her daughter, or how her daughter reacted to them taking her off the will during their trip. And she interpreted that as her being very upset. I'm not sure exactly what the complaining witness's side was to that, but they definitely did have some uneasiness in their relationship between each other.
Do you know what's the time frame that they went on this cruise?
I'm not exactly sure. I would have to double check on that. I'm not sure exactly.
With respect to Mark Herman's testimony, did he get into the lack of physical evidence?
He didn't say that outright, but they did obviously talk about the pornography that was found in the Dev household. So there was a house search sometime in March of 2004 where they went to the Dev home and they basically looked through various computers. I think they got cell phones that were hidden in the backyard in the grass for some reason. I'm not sure why they were there. But it was really weird. They had mentioned something like the phones in the backyard. But there were two main computers in the household, from what I understand, and I'm not sure how many of them had pornography, but there was pornography. But the argument was also that this pornography was all accessed on the same day. And I also read testimony that the pornography didn't say what it did. The title of the pornography wasn't the same as what the contents of the pornography was, which is something that both the defense and the prosecution pointed to. But there was pornography. Like, I will say that there was pornography files found on the computers, from what I understand.
Okay. So overall, start with Bryce here. What is your impression of the testimony that you read?
In terms of the complaining witness, I definitely believed her on some points, but on others, I feel like since there were so many contradictions and a lot of answers that she said that she didn't know, that I don't fully believe that it might not be 100% correct, but I can't say for sure. But in terms of Ajay's wife, I personally interpreted that as a little bit more believable, since her story stayed consistent the entire time. So I thought that one was a little bit more trustworthy, in my opinion.
And your impression of the believability of Mark Herman?
I do see that he got a lot of evidence. Like, he points to a lot of key facts in this case. But at the same time, there are so many holes that he misses. For example, like, he didn't acknowledge the fact that the context of the pretext call really mattered. He didn't follow up on some of the information in that pretext call. He didn't follow up on the claims of physical abuse. He didn't follow up on the fact that the complaining witness had worked at a video store and potentially had access to the pornographic material that was found in the computers. So there was a lot of holes in his testimony that I feel like weren't explored, and there wasn't really a reason why he didn't explore them. And
do you fault the defense attorney for not exploring some of those issues?
I mean, I wouldn't have thought... the defense attorney did bring these issues up.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's just a matter of... I'm somewhat surprised that... Well, from the writ of habeas corpus, from what I understand, the defense now is arguing that the only way the jury was very dependent on the fact of the translation of the complaining witness.
Right.
That was the key evidence. It sounds like, from what I've read, the court was very adamant on the fact that if the complaining witness is the only witness that the jury believes, that one witness is enough. So that's kind of... So if that one witness is called to question, like, their believability, their just their credibility overall, then yeah, this could be a means for a mistrial. And I say this having read the writ of habeas corpus and like kind of the stance on that. But in the case of the testimony I've read from Mark Herman, I do believe that he does touch on some aspects of the case and like his process of investigating it and whatnot, and evidence that is important to consider. But at the same time, there are a lot of holes that aren't poked further, and I think that it probably is because, like, if you were to read over this again, you would see that there's a lot of information that's not actually considered.
I see. So what's your overall sense for the case based at least on what you read?
Based on what I read, I definitely think that it's possible that 100% fair trial wasn't necessarily given, and since there's so many inconsistencies with the testimonies and no real hard evidence for what supposedly happened, I think that if anything, Ajay just deserves a more fair trial, in my opinion. Yeah, that's pretty much what I think about it.
And you?
Solely from the testimony, I do think that there were a lot of holes that weren't explored. Like, there was a lot of information, specifically in knowing that the pretext call was very crucial to the jury's decision. There was a lot of context around that very much should have been explored a lot more, and I do think that he could have received, like, a fairer trial.
Yeah, I think understanding the context of everything makes it hard a little bit to read, a little bit of testimony from one witness and not understand it in the big picture. So we know from the jurors' statements on social media after the trial that basically they kind of discounted the alleged victim's testimony, but they gave a huge amount of weight to the pretext call. And so, the fact that, there were key things that the young woman testified to about locations and times when she was raped, when family members and friends were able to kind of cast real doubt on some of them. The one in Monterey always stands out in my mind. But basically, they're sleeping on the floor in the living room, and it's a group full of people, and supposedly he rapes her in the midst of all these people, and you just kind of wonder about the believability of that. And there's another instance where she describes being raped in his bed with his wife in the bed asleep, and the wife Did you read the wife's testimony on that?
She wasn't asked about that in the part that I read.
Right. Okay. So I mean, you know, the wife, basically, Peggy, testified that, you know, she's a light sleeper and she didn't think that somebody could be, you know, doing all that stuff in the bed next to her and her not wake up. So those are, you know, big issues that came out during the trial. But the jury, I think, disregarded that because they thought that he basically acknowledged the crime, and we now know from the enhanced translation that he really didn't say anything close to that. You know, as I said in the previous segment, the new translation suggests that basically he's asking her, he's saying, look, if I did all this stuff to you, why would you continue to live in my house after you turned 18 and you didn't have to live there anymore? And so they turned that into, you know, kind of a sexual acknowledgement. But, you know, the problem is even during the original trial, the translator hired by the defense said, no, that's not consistent with any word that we know of in Nepali for sex. And so, you know, but the jury